Shalom. This week we are reading Parashat Chayei Sara, and it's really the consummate Torah portion of the relationship between Avraham and Sarah. The Torah portion begins with the demise of Sarah, and indeed a good deal of the beginning of the Parasha is taken up with the arrangements that Avraham Avinu made with securing the Marat HaMachpelah, the double cave in Hebron, the burial of Sarah. And the Parasha ends with the death of Avraham. And Avraham and Sarah, they were really like the perfect couple. And there is so much that can be learned about marital bliss, about relationships, about proper communication, about sharing a life's work. All of these things and more we can learn in an in-depth study of the conduct between Avraham and Sarah. They were so powerful as personalities and as the very bedrock of the nation of Israel. Indeed, using that analogy, we find the famous and beautiful verse in the book of Isaiah, chapter 51, and verse 1, "Listen to me, O pursuers of righteousness, O seekers of Hashem. Look to the rock from which you were hewn, and at the hollow of the pit from which you were dug. Look to Avraham your forefather, and to Sarah who bore you. For when he was yet one alone did I summon him and bless him and make him many." So this whole iconography of Avraham and Sarah is really unsurpassed. Their relationship, their character, their strength. And our sages tell us that Sarah actually was a greater prophet than Avraham, as we find regarding the incident of Ishmael and Sarah's concern about the influence that Ishmael would have over Yitzchak. Hashem said to Avraham, everything that Sarah tells you, listen to her voice. And again, the Parashat opens with the demise of Sarah. But our sages give us a very rich and very dramatic background in the oral tradition, very, very amazing history of what happened behind the scenes, between the lines, what's really going on in the silence between the end of Parashat Vayera and the beginning of Parashat Chayei Sara. And I'd like to explore an idea, an ancient idea that our sages emphasize in the oral tradition regarding the demise of Sarah, because I think that it is an amazing, powerful tradition from which hopefully we can extract some very profound life lessons, because everything that our sages teach us, again, and we've emphasized this so often, there's nothing that our sages tell us in the oral tradition which is in any way anecdotal or minor. Everything actually forms part of the vibrant and rich tapestry of the entire body of the Torah for us to understand, especially in the sense of that famous adage, Ma'aseh Avot Siman Lebanim, that which fell, the forefathers, that which occurred, happened to the forefathers, is a sign for the children. And that goes for every detail of their lives. So we have an ancient Midrashic tradition of which there are actually two extant different versions, the slight variation, regarding the circumstances of Sarah's death. And this tradition connects Sarah's death with the news that she received of the almost slaughtering of her son Isaac upon the altar by Avraham. And of course, that story had a totally different ending. Avraham was told to stay his hand. Yitzchak lived, and everybody, in a way, I guess, lived happily ever after. Avraham, in any event, passed the test. It was his 10th test, and a very powerful motif ever since for the Jewish people, Akedat Yitzchak, the binding of Isaac. So the Midrash tells us that the Satan, the adversary, we have to describe and define exactly what that means for Jewish people and in Torah tradition. The Satan was not able to trip up Avraham. He was not able to succeed in the case of Avraham, meaning he was not able to get him to back down from attempting to fulfill Hashem's will, but rather Avraham indeed rose to the occasion and met the challenge and was ready to slaughter his son. And the Satan tried to stop him, but he couldn't succeed. And in fact, there are other Midrashim that talk about how the Satan tried to get Avraham to back down from facing the moment of his crisis at the Akedah, the binding. He tried to stop him by creating all sorts of obstacles. He came in the form of a river that he couldn't cross. He did all sorts of things to try to get in the way, try to prevent Avraham from meeting and keeping his appointment with destiny, but it didn't work. Avraham was too strong. So then the Midrash says, this teaching tells us that instead he tried to get Sarah. And so here's a very ancient version of the story from Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, which is a very important work dating from the period of the Mishnah, the great sages of Israel. And the teaching tells us that the Satan came to Sarah in the guise of Yitzchak, a vision she had. Yitzchak wasn't really Yitzchak, it was the Satan. We'll have to talk about what that means. Appeared to Sarah, and Sarah said to Yitzchak, what's happening? What you been up to? What's going on? And Yitzchak, in this vision, really the Satan, said to his mother Sarah, well, you know, I was almost slaughtered by my father, but he stopped. And when Sarah heard that, she expired from grief and anguish and aggravation. And this explains the connection between Parashat Vayera, which of course ends approximately with the Akedah, and Parashat Chayei Sara, which begins with the burial of Sarah. Now, another version of the same story is given to us by the Targum Yonatan, which is a translation in Aramaic of the Torah by great sage of Israel, Yonatan ben Uziel. Purportedly, his teachings, as expressed in the Aramaic, were received from Hillel Hazaken, the elder Hillel, and actually were told over by the prophets Chagai, Zachariah, and Malachi. And this is a very ancient tradition dating back before the destruction of the Second Temple. And in this version of the story, it wasn't the guise of Yitzchak that appeared to Sarah, but it was just the Satan himself who came to Sarah and told her the news, but he lied, and he said, you know, Avraham bound Yitzchak on the altar and slaughtered him. And she expired from the news. Little variation between the two stories, but I told you both because I think that both are important, as we're about to discuss. So, clearly, an ancient tradition from our sages that whoever this is, whatever this is, the Satan comes to Sarah, messes up her mind, plays some sort of a psychological warfare game with her, and either as Yitzchak, appearing as Yitzchak, or appearing as himself, says, I was nearly done for, or he was actually killed, and this is too much for the righteous Sarah, the great prophet, greater than Avraham, and she expires and her soul departs from her. I maintain that there must be some very powerful lesson here, because there are so many ideas here that we need to grapple with. How could this force, and what is this force, overcome Sarah, who was a great spiritual giant? What does it mean that she was undone to the point of death by this news? And most importantly, what's in it for us? Because every teaching of our sages is forever. And again, nothing is minor. These are not children's tales. There's enough fables. There's something here that we must struggle to understand on the deepest level for the enrichment of our own spiritual lives as we seek to serve Hashem. So first of all, I think it would be very beneficial for us to understand a little bit about this concept of the Satan. Because we're Jews, and we do not believe in a character called Satan. That's an important distinction. We don't believe, God forbid, that there's any sort of cosmic battle being fought over our souls. We do not believe that we are ever at the mercy of some sort of cosmic struggle between forces. We do not believe really in the existence of an independent malignant force. The only independent malignant force that we believe in is ourselves. Now, when we take this concept of the Satan and we begin to examine it in the Tanakh, we find actually that the first time it appears in the Torah is in the context of the angel who blocked the way for Bilam in the book of Numbers, chapter 22, and it says there that Hashem had that angel stand on the way, lisaten lo, to be an adversary to him. We also find this word, the Satan, as an enemy, as in the book of 1 Kings, chapter 11, that Hashem, that God established a Satan for Shlomo, who was Hadad the Edomite. So, classically, the word really, Satan, comes from the root meaning to digress, to turn from the way. And the Torah really is teaching us that a person, as ever, as usual, and as always, what we need to emphasize when we understand the deepest lessons of the Torah, a person creates his own Satan. A person is so responsible for everything. A person is so accountable for all of his deeds, all of one's deeds, and we can rise to an occasion and exhibit greatness, or we can be totally stymied and almost just crippled by our own inhibition, anxiety, fear, negativity that we produce. And that really, on a very deep level, is the essence of the idea of the Satan. Yes, we can easily say that there is an angel, a particular angel, which of course does the will of God, whose job it is to try and be a opposing force in our lives to see if we really have this stuff. But that would be no different than talking about the evil inclination, which is an angelic force that's in all of us. But it doesn't mean that we're not responsible ultimately. It doesn't mean that it's not within our power to subdue. It's not that we are being, just buffeted around like marionettes by two opposing forces. That's not the idea at all. So bearing all of that in mind, in a healthy Jewish mindset, and understanding that we are not here victims of some sort of satanic force, and yet trying to understand the word Satan in the Torah, especially as portrayed by these enigmatic, really quite dramatic midrashic portrayals. What does it all mean? Especially in the light of, again, the Satan first came to Avraham on his way to the Akedah, traveling with Yitzchak, tried to stop him, tried to be an adversary, tried to have him digress from the way, tried to have him turn. All of these things related to the root of the word Satan. Presented himself as a wide river that Avraham couldn't cross. All these things were only illusions. And Avraham knew that there was no river. There was nothing standing before him and his chance to fulfill Hashem's word. They were all an illusion. So too, in the case of Sarah, we're talking about an illusion, whether it was an illusion that manifested itself as Yitzchak himself saying, Abba almost slaughtered me, almost cut my neck, but he stopped. Or some other voice inside of Sarah herself saying, don't you know he killed him? You know, I had always heard an expression about how we are our own worst enemies. And so upon investigation, I find that there is actually a quotation that someone said, very often we are our own worst enemy, as we foolishly build stumbling blocks on the path that leads to success and happiness. Little did I know that this is actually attributed to one Louis Binstock, who was a prominent Reform American rabbi. And I like this expression very much. We are very often our own worst enemy, and I think that is truly portraying and conveying a deep idea that we are here dancing around, that we build stumbling blocks. We actually build our own Satan on the path that would lead to our success and happiness, which is the path of service Hashem. I don't know if the good rabbi meant that or not, but that's what I'm using it for, taking from it. So, bearing all of that in mind, the question that I really want to try to delve is, what does all of this mean? Especially understanding that Sarah was such a great person. She was such a strong person. She was such a righteous and spiritually minded individual, so close to Hashem. I'm also very interested about the slight variation between these two versions of the same concept, both of them very ancient, going back to a very early stage of the transmission of Torah knowledge, and therefore something very powerful, solid, and I think eternal is being conveyed by these words. So with God's help, I think this is what I'm getting from all of this. You know, Sarah was a great person, but she was a person, and that's the beauty of the Torah, the beauty of the lessons that the Torah shares with us regarding the forefathers who were on the level of being the mountains, the rocks from which we are hewn, the very inception of our nation. They were so close to Hashem, but they were still people. And so now Sarah has some anxiety. She has some fears. She's very, very connected to Yitzchak. And this is another story altogether, and another full-length teaching about the incredible dimensions of the relationship from birth between Holy Sarah and Yitzchak. And of course she had a lot of fears about Yitzchak and his future and the continuation of the Jewish people and everything that Yitzchak represented to her. And so it's like those fears are presenting themselves to her in the very image of Yitzchak. And she hears about what almost happened, and she's so filled with dread, and she's so filled with anxiety, that, you know what? It might as well have happened. Because, I mean, here he is, he's okay, it didn't happen, but she cannot get past the vision of him being bound and almost slaughtered, and it's so totally debilitating to her that it's almost, it might as well have happened, and she is totally chained, limited, unable to get past the fact that this almost happened. She is now become totally paralyzed by this anxiety. And then in the other vision, where the Satan himself, the voice itself, the voice of Sarah's deepest fears, her deepest inhibition, her deepest and most vulnerable point of being, the well-being of Yitzchak. He's fine. We know the end of the story. He wasn't slaughtered, and yet the news that she receives is that he was slaughtered. Because it came so close for her. She is now absolutely unable to go on. She's more than paralyzed this time, in this version of the portrayal of the scene. It has so seared into her consciousness the reality of the Akedah that it actually kills her. If this was true regarding Sarah, who we are told and we can see from the Torah itself, what Hashem told Avraham, and we know that Sarah's level of prophecy was greater than his. And Sarah was on such a tremendously high level of relationship with Hashem, but yet she was so thoroughly human at the same time. The Midrash here is conveying to us a crucial life lesson. Ma'aseh avot siman labanim mamash. This is a classic and clear example of how what transpired for the forefathers is a sign for the children. Because if this could be true regarding the pure and the righteous and the holy Sarah, the matriarch, how much more so can it be true regarding any person? That a person can be so much their own enemy. A person can so much create a stumbling block on the road to happiness and success. A person can be so totally held back by our own inhibitions, by our own fears, by our own anxieties, that we can actually, it can kill us. It can kill us. And I think this is the message of these twin midrashim, this ancient tradition regarding the background, the backdrop, the secret behind the opening verses of our Parsha this week, the death of Sarah. She was profoundly affected in a negative way by Avraham's greatest accomplishments. And maybe this is another deep insight into the exact expression of our holy sages, who were so concise and so precise regarding every word, because it reads that the Satan saw that he was not successful with Avraham, so he would seek success with Sarah, and he found it. What does that mean? He was not successful in stopping Avraham from fulfilling Hashem's will, but he was successful in striking at Avraham's core belief through Sarah. Again, the Satan not being an external malignant force, but being the place inside of all of us, and which all of us create, wherein we fail in summing up the full totality of our positive force of personality and our ability to serve Hashem under all circumstances. And this is something that we always have to contend with, each of us in our own way, have this stumbling block, this adversary, this enemy that we create. And it feeds off of our weak place, the anxiety, the fear. And it's that very place that hurts, which we must instruct and which we must overcome in order to serve Hashem. And so these midrashim regarding our matriarch Sarah do not in any way diminish from her grandeur, from her greatness, from her immense spirituality, but rather they serve to instruct her children into how we must go through our lives and take exceeding caution and care not to fall prey to our own fears, but to muster the inner strength and to remember our connection with Hashem, and not to fall victims to our own illusions of what might have been, not to be stuck in the fear of what might have happened, but rather to live every moment to the fullest and never to be our own worst enemy.